we examine a critical development in U.S. foreign policy as the Trump administration positions substantial military assets in the Middle East while amplifying its rhetoric on Iran. With two carrier battle groups either stationed or en route to the region, Washington is signaling what officials describe as a decisive shift in approach toward Tehran, one rooted in what they characterize as projecting overwhelming strength. The strategic calculus behind this deployment was articulated clearly by Senator John Hoeven, a Republican from North Dakota who serves on the Senate Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. Speaking on the growing U.S. military presence, Senator Hoeven framed the administration's posture in unambiguous terms. Iran's leadership responds only to demonstrations of power. He invoked a regional proverb, "Bet on the strong horse," to underscore his argument that in Middle Eastern geopolitics, perceived strength dictates outcomes. According to Hoeven, President Trump and the United States represent that strong horse, and the current show of force is designed to communicate to Iran's supreme leader and his government that fundamental change must occur.
What makes this moment particularly significant is the combination of military positioning with diplomatic possibility. Senator Hoeven suggested that while the naval deployment serves as unmistakable leverage, it may also create conditions for negotiation. He characterized President Trump as an exceptional deal-maker and praised Secretary of State Marco Rubio as among the most intelligent individuals he has encountered, specifically noting Rubio's sophisticated understanding of international affairs. The senator indicated that some form of agreement might be achievable, though he acknowledged uncertainty about the outcome. This military and diplomatic approach unfolds against a backdrop of intensifying calls for regime change in Iran. The exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, son of the deposed Shah of Iran, has become an increasingly vocal advocate for the Iranian population. In recent remarks, Pahlavi described the Iranian people's demands as fundamentally simple. They seek liberty and freedom. He expressed approval of President Trump's public acknowledgement that regime change might represent a viable solution, calling it something advocates have requested for an extended period. The Crown Prince also responded directly to the president's characterization of the Iranian regime as one that engages in endless talk. Pahlavi emphasized a darker dimension. The regime has not only talked, but has persistently killed its own citizens. His statement underscored what he and others describe as a continuing pattern of lethal repression, even as diplomatic discussions occur. Yet the Crown Prince's prominent role in this discussion carries historical complexity that cannot be overlooked. His father's rule ended in 1979 with a revolution driven significantly by young Iranians who helped establish the very theocratic system that now governs the country. That historical irony raises questions about how any potential transition might be received by the Iranian population, particularly given the circumstances that led to the monarchy's downfall nearly 5 decades ago. Senator Hoeven addressed this historical concern directly, acknowledging its validity while pivoting to what he characterized as the exceptional brutality of the current Iranian government. He described Iran's theocracy as the most oppressive regime in existence, one that actively promotes terrorism. The senator's indictment extended beyond internal repression. He cited the killing of more than 30,000 protesters, Iranian citizens demonstrating against their own government. But he emphasized that Iran's actions reach far beyond its borders through what he termed its cat's paws: Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. This network of proxy relationships formed the basis for Senator Hoeven's most sweeping assertion that Iran functions as the largest exporter of terrorism of any country in the world. He pointed to the Iranian government's refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist and its stated objective that Israel should be eliminated entirely. This combination of domestic oppression and regional destabilization, according to the senator, defines the regime under which the Iranian people currently suffer. The senator referenced demonstrations that occurred across multiple countries, describing hundreds of thousands and millions of people expressing solidarity with Iranians seeking to remove what he called an oppressive yoke. On the question of the Crown Prince's potential role, Hoeven offered measured perspective. He suggested that, at most, the exiled royal might serve in a transitional capacity or as a participant in some intervening process. Ultimately, the senator emphasized, governance must reflect what the Iranian people themselves desire. The Iranian regime's treatment of its own population has emerged as a point of unusual cross-party criticism in Washington. Senator John Fetterman, a Pennsylvania Democrat, recently took the extraordinary step of publicly criticizing Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, questioning what he perceives as inconsistent application of human rights principles. Fetterman challenged why the Congresswoman from the Bronx appears eager to criticize Israel while remaining largely silent as Iran executed thousands of its own protesters. The Democratic senator's remarks reflected broader frustration with what he views as selective outrage. He called for standing with Israel as America's special ally, rejecting accusations of genocide while pointing to what he characterized as actual genocide, the execution of tens of thousands of people in Iran. Fetterman's pointed question was direct. Why not call out those atrocities as well? Senator Hoeven praised Fetterman's stance, describing the Pennsylvania Democrat as both clear-eyed and clear-spoken regarding the necessity of supporting Israel against what Hoeven again termed oppressive regimes like Iran. The North Dakota Republican highlighted another dimension of Fetterman's argument. When American senators and representatives travel overseas, they should demonstrate unity and support for the United States as the country works with allies to combat tyranny and assist oppressed populations. This bipartisan criticism of perceived double standards in human rights advocacy represents a notable development in American political discourse. It suggests that Iran's internal repression, documented by human rights organizations and opposition groups, is increasingly difficult for any political faction to ignore or minimize, regardless of broader foreign policy disagreements. As we assess the current moment, several elements converge: substantial American military assets moving into position, explicit rhetoric from senior administration officials about the possibility of regime change, increasingly prominent roles for Iranian opposition figures including the exiled crown prince, documented mass killings of protesters within Iran, and emerging bipartisan consensus that the Tehran government's human rights record demands international response. The strategic question facing policymakers centers on whether military pressure creates space for diplomatic resolution, precipitates broader confrontation, or catalyzes internal change within Iran itself. Senator Hoeven's comments suggest the administration believes that projecting maximum strength, symbolized by carrier battle groups with enormous destructive capability, establishes necessary preconditions for any meaningful negotiation or transformation. What remains uncertain is how this pressure campaign will unfold, whether Iran's leadership will respond to what Washington describes as necessary change, and what role, if any, the Iranian population will play in determining their country's trajectory. The senator's invocation of massive global demonstrations suggests belief that internal and external pressure might combine to force fundamental shifts in Iranian governance. For now, the immediate reality is clear. The United States has positioned significant military force within striking distance of Iran while simultaneously leaving diplomatic channels at least theoretically open. Secretary of State Rubio's involvement signals that negotiation remains a possibility, even as the military deployment sends an unmistakably confrontational signal. The characterization of Iran as the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, the documentation of 30,000 killed protesters, the proxy networks operating across the Middle East, and the regime's explicit rejection of Israel's right to exist, these factors combine to form the administration's case for why the current approach represents not escalation but necessary response. Whether this strategy produces the change Senator Hoeven and the administration seek, whether it leads to military confrontation, or whether it opens unexpected diplomatic pathways, remains the defining question as these carrier battle groups take their positions and as the rhetoric from Washington intensifies. What is evident tonight is that the Trump administration has decided that previous approaches proved insufficient, and that a fundamental recalibration of American policy toward Tehran is now underway. The coming weeks will reveal whether strength, as Senator Hoeven argues, truly represents the only language Iran's leadership understands, and whether that understanding leads to negotiation, confrontation, or transformation from within. That is the analysis tonight as America projects power and considers its options in one of the world's most volatile regions.